my name is Bogdan Kravchenko, and I manage the Afghanistan Research Initiative at the Graduate School of Development. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our public lecture. This is our third public lecture. The Afghan Research Initiative was launched in 2022 to help sustain research and capacity gains made in the past decade and to continue to produce knowledge critical to the present and the future. And we do this through research grants supporting doctoral students, and we have had a very good response and success. We have a newsletter that you should try to subscribe to if you haven't, where you can follow our news, and especially the publications that are beginning to emerge from our project that are quite important publications. This is, I'm very, very pleased to welcome and to introduce two people whom I have known for quite some time, both working in the Ministry of had worked in the Ministry, worked in the Ministry of Finance, with whom our university and the Graduate School of Development, and me in particular, has had a long collaboration that unfortunately did not continue, although I should say that the Taliban approached us to see if it can continue. So, and we have two speakers, Waheedullah Hamoon and Ahmad Tawakkoli. Waheed is the former head of public investment management at the Ministry of Finance, and he has a longer history than that with UCA because he took our certificate in policy analysis course and did well, and he also completed our master's in economic policy. So we are pleased to have him as an alumnus speaking on this. And we have then Ahmad Tawakkoli, who was the Director of Policy Analysis at Afghanistan's Ministry of Finance. And he has an MA from a German university. A word or two about the Ministry of Finance. In Afghanistan, where you had a presidential system, you didn't have a cabinet government. The center of government, the coordination of policy was always a problem. And in fact, this role was played by the Ministry of Finance that became an aggregative ministry. And its policy department was quite large, about 160, 130 people, which was, I mean, no other ministry had a policy department of that size. In fact, part of the problem in Afghanistan was that ministries did not have policy departments, which is highly unusual because if you look at the ministry of any Western or sort of a modern country, you'll see that every ministry has a huge department of policy evaluation and this sort of thing. So these are people well qualified to speak on this topic, and it's a very important one. And it's on the national budgeting and revenue collection under the Taliban. I should say that there's virtually no literature on this. The first article to appear on this topic that is comprehensive, unlike some of the bits and pieces that appeared before, was written by these two gentlemen, and it's available. It's in our newsletter. And this is a very, very significant contribution to knowledge. So this is the first time you will hear these numbers because they haven't appeared anywhere else. So thank you very much for participating in this public lecture. Our next one is going to be in April. Please bear that in mind. Waheed, please start your presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Kravchenko. It's a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate you convening this webinar. We are excited to present the results of our research paper and have prepared the presentation to share. The research was conducted between March 2023 and the end of that year with a research grant from ARI. Let me share my screen.
There we go.
Yeah. I will begin by presenting part of the presentation, and then my colleague, Ahmad Omid Tawakkoli, will proceed with the rest. Just to set the context, let me provide a brief overview. On August 15, 2021, the Taliban took control of Afghanistan's capital, resulting in dramatic changes in the country's political, economic, and financial landscape. The new government, the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, is not recognized and cannot receive international financial assistance because of its policies on women and lack of political inclusivity, leading to serious challenges in revenues and budgeting. The Emirate has to rely on domestic revenue to finance expenses. The Emirate is collecting revenues from every possible source to cover its recurrent expenses, but this effort is far from sufficient to bridge the gap created by the absence of aid. This has led to significant contraction of the budget and decline in development spending to address the urgent humanitarian crisis and socio-economic needs. The Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan has one of the world's most peculiar forms of government. It's a highly centralized theocracy with power concentrated in the hands of the supreme leader, the religious leader, the head of the state, and the commander-in-chief. The supreme leader appoints and dismisses the cabinet, judiciary, armed forces, general staff, and provincial and municipal authorities. Issues decrees and instructions, approves or vetoes laws drafted by the cabinet. The supreme leader, based in a compound in Kandahar province, is reclusive and rarely seen public. He is assisted by Kandahar's Ulama Council, whom he appoints and who form the ruling body that sets policies and provides oversight. The Prime Minister and Council of Ministers, based in Kabul, are responsible for government operations. There's no constitution, no parliament. While the political, social, and especially gender aspects of the extensive changes brought about the Taliban regime have been studied, their national budget and revenue collection practices remain under research. Research has been stymied by the Taliban government's hesitancy to release budget and expenditure data. This paper, written by a team with a background in Afghan public finance based on hitherto unpublished data, offers new insight on national budget and revenue collection. So it is worth mentioning that I have worked for more than 10 years at the Ministry of Finance, and I served under President Karzai and as well President Ghani. This study undertaken on national budget document for the respective fiscal years, as well as data from the Revenue Management Information System, due to the current absence of reporting transparency that existed under the previous government, some data that would normally be in the public domain were collected through informal channels. So national budgeting under the Republic, Public Financial and Expenditure Management Law, which was approved in 2005, established the legal base for the administration of the country's public finance. Nevertheless, there were tangible developments of the Afghan PFM, as evidenced by the results of the Open Budget Survey, or OBS, in 2021, which assessed the government practices in the 2020 budget. Overall, Afghanistan ranked 70 out of 120 countries. So as you can see, Republic became a ranger state. As the figure shows, Its share of the total budget between 2012 and 2021 ranged from 48% to 72%. It covered most of the development budget and played a significant role in covering recurring government expenses, especially those associated with the armed forces and security. National budgeting under the Emirate. The Taliban seized power and established an Islamic Emirate in a country that had changed much since they last held power. They took an economy whose GDP was 3 times greater than under their previous rule, with a legal framework commensurate to a market economy. 3,000 functioning health facilities compared to 450 in 2000. A state administration with almost 5 times more civil servants than in 2000. While in 2000, 0.1% of the population had mobile phones, by 2020, the figure was 60%, and 20% were internet users. The country had the largest mass of educated people in its history. University students grew from 7,000 in year 2000, 0 women, to 425,000, 40% of whom were women, by 2019. The Taliban expanded the state sector to over 1 million employees by 2023. Under the previous government in the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan in 2020, there were 415,000 public servants, excluding the military. The comparable number for the Emirate, excluding the military, is 865,650, an increase of over 100%. For the Taliban, civil service jobs are considered war booty, a way of rewarding thousands of Taliban loyalists, few of whom who have skills other than fighting. The Taliban government comprises 50 entities, a decrease from the 56 entities of the Republic. The Independent Administrative Reform and Civil Service Commission, the Director of Local Governments, the Ministry of Women Affairs, and the Electoral Commission were among the 14 units dismantled. 8 entities were transformed, and 7 new ones were created. This reversed merit-based appointments and gave the Taliban political control of the civil service recruitment process. The most important new entity is the Office of the Supreme Leader, with a staff of over 5,000, and the General Director of Supervision and overseeing the execution of the decrees and orders of the Supreme Leader. This used to be the Attorney General's office during the Republic. With 9,000 personnel, although the leader lives in seclusion in Kandahar, he receives information from a vast network of agents, and another group reports on the implementation of his directives. These structures employs 15,000 people, far more significant than the ministries, and are critical in controlling government institutions and society. The Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Preservation of Vice would replace the Ministry of Women Affairs, employs 7,300 people. The Virtue Ministry has 7 times more staff than the Ministry of Economy and 30% more than the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs, which indicates the Emirate's priorities. So budgeting process under the ARI, while the computers and systems remain in the Ministry of Finance, Public Financial Management, or PFM, now operates in a different fiscal and political environment. Some aspects include the cessation of aid and the sudden sharp decline of the economy, revenues, and a reduced budget. Another is an abrupt shift of funding priorities, with prominence given to military and security expenditures, while sectors such as health, social welfare, and infrastructure development were passed over. The dramatic change in government meant that the entire budget process, now with the role of Parliament or the public, became opaque, without any effort to achieve transparency or public discussion. The budget process is driven by a relatively small circle, as reflected in the figure that is drafted by MOF, and that is the budget hearing is ad hoc and occasional. then approved by the Ministers' Council and Prime Minister, and then enacted by the Supreme Leader, and then it goes to the execution phase. So there is no Parliament, public hearing sessions, and all processes that PFM required in the Republic time. National budgeting under the Emirate, we are focusing now on mini budget. So the Republic's budget was based on the Gregorian calendar that started from the January until the December of that year. But the Taliban changed that. The Taliban stretches the fiscal year from the first day of the first month of the solar Hijri year to the last day of the 12th month of the same solar Hijri, corresponding to 21st of March to 20th of March of the next year. For the remaining 3 months, Taliban created a mini budget. The mini budget was published on MOF website as was required by the previous government PFM law. The $634 million was first budget without foreign aid and provisions to pay the salaries and ARIs. So for this budget, our 90% of the budget went to operating costs, primarily salaries, and the remaining 8% was for development. However, the development budget was unfunded, and the operating budget deficit was around $20 million. Defense and security received 40% of the mini budget, 3 months of the mini budget. From this part onwards, my colleague, Mr. Tawakkoli, will present. I believe you will be sharing your presentation, right?
Yes. Should I share that? Let me
stop here.
Okay, thank you. Hello again. Thank you, Dr. Kravchenko, for making all these happen and for all your efforts in the framework of Afghanistan Research Institute. And thank you to my colleague. And special thanks to all the audience we have today, or probably tonight, for some people like me. So I will start from, as my colleague briefly discussed about their first budget. The Taliban government first budget was a mini budget to bridge the gap of 3 months due to the change in the fiscal year calendar. They used the same exercise of publishing that mini budget, the same as the Ministry of Finance used to do under the Republic. But starting from fiscal year 1401, which starts from March 2022 to March 2023, they have ceased practicing the publication of a budget in the same ways that the Ministry of Finance exercised under the Republic. But nevertheless, it's the first full year budget that they have delivered. As we can see, the total budget is 2.5 billion, and it's heavily operational and as well as heavily security based. Almost 87% of this budget goes to the governments, the Afghan governments, the Taliban government's recurrent and operating expenses, and merely 11% was dedicated to the development side, which amounts to 280 million. It was actually the estimated one, but then it got revised, and it attracted attention, since in the revised part, the Taliban showed that they were good and good tax collectors, and their revenue increased by 15%. And among the revenue, we see that 30% increase was in the customs area. We have to recall that customs has remained one of the main sources of internal revenues for Afghan governments, and it was also at the same time very notorious because of the corruption. As we have, the revision showed that the Taliban have increased their revenue, and since they have increased their revenue, they have increased their expenditures. But the revenue performance was, especially from customs, it exceeded the target by 30%, and it showed that there is going to be a path dependency of this government again depending on custom revenues for its next coming year budget practices. Then we have their second year full year budget, and as we see, it shows a figure of 3.5 billion, and still it's very highly operational, with 87% going to recurrent budget, and development budget still gets a 13%. But this budget comes with one other feature. It has a very alarming deficit of 30%, more than 1 billion. Since we don't have, for the time being, we don't have comprehensive information about the execution of this budget. But if we see if the Taliban government is not going to find adequate financial resources to fund its 30% deficit, it has to not only compromise its development commitments, but it must compromise it on its recurrent expenses, kind of sign of insolvency. And we see that this budget is also very heavily security based, and more than 40% of this budget is dedicated to security, and some other sectors like human development, such as higher education and health, receives 3 and 2.2% respectively. And in terms of pension, the Taliban have shut down paying pensions to people which they deserved, and they have paid from their paychecks. As we can see from their security allocations, overall 44% of this budget goes to security. Only Ministry of Interior attracts more than 18%, Defense 17%, and General Directorate of Intelligence, which is their intelligence unit, receives 6.36%. Prison Affairs Authority, and they have also, as my colleague also mentioned, the Ministry of Promoting Virtue and Preventing Vice, which is essentially their morality police, is kind of non-civilian in nature, and there is Prime Minister's Protecting Services. So overall, collectively, they attract 44% of the budget. This is astonishing, since the Taliban have announced end of wars and conflicts in Afghanistan, and they effectively face very minimal insurgencies, but from their expense point of view, they are investing a lot on their security apparatus. In terms of development budget, as we have seen, the allocations are insignificant, but still we go in details, we see that they don't have any agenda, no development agenda exists. And in retrospect, the former Afghan government had agendas, although it had a lot of problems in getting it materialized and realized, but it still could affect, especially in terms of foreign development fundings. But we have not heard, and we are not aware of any agenda, and there are no signs that there is a pattern of development spendings in the country. And there is, of course, no mid and long-term fiscal frameworks. We have not seen they published the so-called fiscal strategic paper, which was kind of macroeconomic base for the preparation of budget under the Republic. And we see that basically the development budget is a basket of very small projects. they have 170 projects, and only 25 of those exceed the threshold of 2 million. Among those, 2 projects stand out with highest value. First, the second phase of Qoshtapa Canal, and which receives 95 million in funding, and the second is $16 million funding to continue the railway project that connects Herat to Khaf. In terms of geographical breakdown, we see that it's unbalanced and centered toward 10 provinces in terms of number of projects, and in terms of value, it is it has a tendency towards only 5 provinces, which attract 80% of the development commitments that has been made in the context of this budget. Other than that, we don't see actually any pattern that exists, not in terms of value, not in terms of sectoral allotments, and it can be traced out to the absence of any midterm and long-term development agenda that's absent under this government. One of the things that attracted attention was how this government is collecting revenues. For example, the revenues that are estimated to be collected in budget 1402, which is from March 2023 to March 2024. 56% is planned to come from the customs, and taxes would play 23%, and non-tax revenues going to play 21%. With this estimations, the civil service is under enormous pressure to swell the government coffers at any cost, and it will have its repercussions on the public welfare, which is the public which is still grappling with destitution and poverty, as well as the vulnerable private sector. We see the signs that they are employing more manpower to fill their coffers. For example, Ministry of Finance personnel increased from 9,936 in 2022 to 12,998 by 2023, especially in departments that are designed to collect revenue. We see the Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock increase its personnel from 7,500 to 11,500 because it is designated to collect 2 types of religious taxes, ushur and zakat. Ushur is a tenth of harvest, and zakat is a share of one's personal wealth to be dedicated to poor. We have to say that this revenue that's being collected by Ministry of Agriculture is not being collected in the form in the context of the revenue system that the Ministry of Finance has. It's collected directly by the Ministry of Agriculture, and the reports state that it's transferred to the coffers that are specifically controlled by the Supreme Leader for his expenses. We see an elevated focus. We still see the government, the current government, is trying to collect money from any source possible. For example, Ministry of Trade and Commerce is responsible to identify, like any ministry in the country, in the state, to find income generating opportunities for the government, such as establishing industrial parks and then trade zones, and then selling them to private sector, which would generate enormous amounts for the government. And we see the signs that these increased attentions have in fact increased the revenue for these state units. And we see that there are new or raised existing user fees. For example, Public Health, Ministry of Public Health is collecting revenue by charging service fees to patients in public at public hospitals. Education sector is raising fees for diploma, certificates, and other credentials that they hand out to former students. And we know that National Statistics Administration is increasing the fees for Tazkira, the national identity card. And since the ministries are under enormous pressure to increase their revenues, it definitely cause the private sector to hinder from growth. They're also banking on mining sector. Afghanistan is famous for having intact resources. The government revenue from mining was 209 million in 2022, which shows almost eightfold increase to that of what the government republic had in 2022. And we know that we are aware that they have signed a multi-billion contract in August 2023 with several companies that have links to foreign companies in mining sector, and they have signed a contract worth of 540 million for the Hamoon River Basin for oil extraction. So there is an increased attention to collect revenue from these sources too. The coal export has played a very big role in collecting revenues too. And as we know that these increased revenues are happening in the time of very alarming economic situations and in the time of people grappling with destitution and pervasive poverty. Robust revenue collection happening in these times can indicate some other external exogenous issues. Is it a corruption crackdown? We could not say that, but we can say that corruption perception index presented by the Transparency International was in 2021, it was 16, but it increased in 2022 to 24. But we see that in 2023, it decreased again to 20. It would be unsustainable to claim that it's a corruption crackdown, but we know that they are increasing revenue from the sources that was very notorious for being very corrupt during the Republic. One of the issues that should not be overlooked is the role and influence that the international fundings have in terms of humanitarian aid flow. They have been kind of fortunate. They have been kind of lucky that the international community has responded to countries' massive humanitarian disaster. Of course, they still stubbornly refuse to yield on a women's right and any kind of political inclusion that would pave the road for a legitimate and recognized government which would access the international aid. As we can see in 2022, against the more than 4 billion humanitarian appeal, Afghanistan has substantially attracted 3.2 billion in humanitarian aid, which is more than the Taliban's, the Islamic Emirates budget for that year, and 16% of budget. And as we can see, some very important sectors like health, education, food security, agriculture, and nutrition are attracting massive amounts compared to what the government, the de facto government, is spending in these sectors. In 2023, we see that the commitments decreased substantially. It's 1.47 billion. It is a thing of reflection, a matter of reflection, because the economic situation in Afghanistan has not been in the betterment and the people have not got out from destitution, but we see a very significant decreasing trend in humanitarian aids, which would be alarming for the Afghan economy because of the massive influence, massive role that these humanitarian aids have, especially in terms of cash transfers, that relieves the shortage of currency to some extent. But we see it's in massive in decline. Of course, the humanitarian aid is designed to bypass the de facto government and the local and international NGOs under UN execute the aid. And we see that in 2023, there were 5,318 national and 481 international NGOs. And we see the rise of registered NGOs that could be traced out to the fact that a lot of people who lost job due to the absence, due to the shutdown of aid and closure of many offices that they were employed by. So some of them have registered their NGOs to secure their living. Okay, we know that these humanitarian aids are very necessary to respond to the humanitarian disaster that the Afghan population is facing, but effectively it's kind of outsourcing opportunity for the Islamic Emirate and the Taliban government in terms of critical care for the population they should be responsible for. In these terms, as my colleague said, that the previous Afghan government was a kind of rentier state because of its massive dependency on development and humanitarian aid. The current government is also a new form of rentier state. It very much depends on humanitarian aids to reach out to the population that it governs. That's from my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have, so the way we'll go, there is the chat box, Q&A, and we have a couple of questions there. And participants, if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, please do. So let's begin with the question. One is, Tawakkoli mentioned that Taliban have no development agenda and minimum allocations for development spending. If that's the case, what about the investments made for the Tapa Canal? And secondly, how would you look at allocations for health and education, albeit madrasa support? I would like to deal with the question on health and education in particular, because it's something I've looked at carefully. But can you please say that, okay, they have no development agenda. How do you explain the Tepa Canal investment and this sort of thing?
Thank you for the question, a very great question. The only thing, the previous government had some kind of agenda, and it was in close contact with its regional partners to work on transnational projects. One of the main, aside from corruption, one of the main challenges that the government was facing was instability and absence of security. So the Taliban have this leverage that they are that they have the luxury of stability and relative security in the country, as well as their approach of ensuring that the corruption is not a problem when they have a commitment. That's why it is a space of discussion for transnational projects that Afghanistan has still a lot of potential to offer to. And I believe your next question was about health sector. You're muted, Dr. Kravchenko.
Question was about health and education. So in terms of health, I think that everybody should know that that is almost entirely funded by international aid. Yes. Although the number of salaried workers in hospitals has improved, has increased, and that's largely because they are security guards. So let me deal with the question of education. The Taliban had a very big problem, and that is that they have hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of supporters that have no skill, and they have to be given jobs, because if they're not given jobs, then they are a potential source of instability. And so you see the doubling of the civil service precisely because they are going out and giving them jobs. In terms of education, it's true that the number of people working in the Ministry of Education now has increased, but what's involved is a total dismantling of contemporary modern education. What they have done is taken all the madrasas and put them under the Ministry of Education. And also, they're beginning to say that if you finished 6 years of madrasa, you have a bachelor's degree. If you did 8 years of madrasa, you now have a master's degree. This is a profanity. So they have all these thousands and thousands of mullahs that need to be given jobs, and they are being given jobs in this growing sector of education, madrasa education, which has very little science, as you know, and is of no particular use in society. The other thing that has happened is that in the normal university curriculum, for example, they now introduced Islamic studies because they have mullahs that need jobs as well. So you have an absurd situation where in the computer science department at the faculty at Kabul University in computer science, 24% of the curriculum is devoted to religious studies. That far more is devoted to religious study than to the study of mathematics and English. So this is so they're trying to provide jobs. At the same time, the Taliban leadership says we need technical specialists because we need economic growth, and unless we have technical specialists, we're not going to get anywhere. So, you know, the growth in education is not because they're concerned about improving the figures for education. And don't forget that when you talk about education, girls after grade 6 don't get educated. Now, how 50% of the population can be excluded is absolutely staggering. But it is an education of job creation for mullahs. I don't know if you want to add. There was.
Can I add some points, Dr. Boda?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, regarding the Minister of Health, as you pointed out, you know, like the personnel grew from 13,000 personnel during the Republic to almost 30,000. So the minister budget is less than half what it was during the Republic. So right now it is 80 million. Compared to during the Republic, it was 211 million. And it represents only 2.4% of the government's current spending. So as you pointed out, well, the growth in the number of employees is largely due to the employment of former Taliban fighters as security guards and other auxiliary functions. And regarding the Pushtipa, you know, Taliban allocated like 80% of their development budget to Pushtipa. It received almost $96 million for the year 2023 and 24. So when 80 or 90% of the development budget goes to one project, so you think that this is the whole problem of the country, and there is no any other problem to be addressed. So that is why the distribution is not realistic. So there are other projects, very important projects that needs to be funded, but most of these projects, they didn't get any funding, and the only project that got funding is.
But Waheed, I'm going to have to start interrupting because we have lots of questions. And Dalib, you raised your hand. You want to say something? Please ask your. Yes.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Hello, Mr. Bohdan. I'm Andalip, one of the previous director of Ministry of Finance, Deputy Ministry for Policy. Thanks for my colleagues, Mr. Tawakkoli and Mr. Hamoon, for this research and nice presentation. I just wanted to add two more comments. As I joined late, if it's already discussed, please ignore my comments. First, the majority of a budget or the large percentage of the budget goes to operational cost. This is not transparent. Of course, it goes to operational expenditures, and it's not transparent. A big portion of aid directly goes to some individuals with direct orders given by Taliban leaders, and they count on operational cost, while they use for their personal purposes with their parties in different provinces, especially and for some individuals related to Taliban leaders. This is one issue I wanted to add on the expenditure part. The second issue is collecting or generating income from new sources. Taliban government tries to find some new sources for income generation with any cost and without any comprehensive study and international standards. They are bidding Afghanistan small miners with very low criteria among some interested traders or investors, especially those who are in contact before with the Taliban, and they are just robbing the Afghanistan miners with very low cost. And of course, it's a big issue for future of Afghanistan, and they don't know, and they are just trying to generate income to cover some expenses. There are, of course, some questions on different parts, and I will be happy to take part to answer some relevant question. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So let's take one of the written question, and then we'll take a question from a hands up. Why Afghan? So in other words, a very informative presentation, flexibility.
Maybe we should let him speak.
What?
The same person who raised another.
Yeah, I'm going to take one of the written questions first. Okay, so let's take, was there another hand raised? I don't see it.
The same person could
I don't see it. What are you talking about? Just wait a second. We're trying to figure out who raised a hand. No. No. Sorry. There's a tool. You raised your hand. I'm sorry. I'm a techno peasant. It takes me time to find things. Atul, will you say something? You wanted to say something, please?
Hi, good morning. My name is Atul. I lived in Afghanistan from 2006 to 13, and I was fortunate to travel in every region, right from Herat to Eastern Province, Northern, and in the middle of Afghanistan, Changcharan and all those places. What I find, capacity building is important. Afghanistan having lots of youth population with good English and they are quite well educated because their accessibility to Pakistan, India, and Iran, and some people in Europe as well. My question is there, why not Afghan? To revenue management is very important because Afghanistan under Taliban regime is pretty safe and secure to travel people, and they are very open to give visa also. So why not develop the tourism? There's a potential in tourism. Why not get a revenue from tourism by keeping all the culture, heritage places, maintain the heritage places, and engage women and youth wherever required? Because I find that if you see go east and south, in the south, it's not much, but western province like Herat, many women are quite active. So Taliban should be quite flexible. Originally, I'm from India, but I live in Canada. But I find nowadays, now even there's no diplomatic tie. India is quite engaging with Afghanistan in the health sector and infrastructure sector. So slowly things will improve. But Taliban has to flexible also in terms of capacity building, women empowerment, agriculture, because malnutrition and poverty reduction, these things are very, very important. But the first thing is tourism development.
Well, I think the first thing is to stop having an gender apartheid regime where you exclude half the population from education after grade 6. This is the only country in the world that does that. And it's simply unspeakable when you imagine it, considering that before the Taliban took power, 40% of the university students at Kabul University were girls, 60% in Herat was girls. And we all know that higher education is the main driver, is a principal driver of economic development. And why the Taliban have this fixation on discrimination against women is a very interesting question. And they are prepared to be adamant about this, even though it means that they receive less humanitarian aid. And the point that our colleagues make should be emphasized is that humanitarian aid is being provided by the international community, not by the Taliban. So we have a question which is very informative presentation. Again, it's the whole question of women's empowerment, agriculture and youth engagement. The other question is why Afghan people still facing challenge, they receive so much help from humanitarian aid and others. Can it be the influence of the Taliban, or does their dependence does not want them to develop? I'm not quite sure about the question. But in other words, why do Afghan people still face challenges when they are receiving humanitarian aid from other resources? There isn't that much humanitarian aid. Anyway, please. Ahmad, or you want to answer the question? When is enough? Why is there not enough humanitarian aid?
I ask you, Professor, a question. Could humanitarian aid develop an underdeveloped country anywhere in the world?
No, it's
They can.
Look, I think what is underestimated of us here is hopefully the rains will be better, is the extent of the humanitarian catastrophe, where 80 to 90% of the population is teetering on poverty. This is not a joke, and this message is not getting through to the international community. But the international community is just getting tired of insisting over and over again with the Taliban government, you have to change your policy in women. President Karzai keeps talking about that, and they refuse to do it. So there's another question is, nowadays in Afghanistan, I see local business and shops are shutting down their business every day due to strict tax regulation. So how do you see the future of the private sector of the Taliban regime? Do you see any hope for growth?
if this question is directed to me, so
So it's directed to you.
okay.
You
So I will. Okay. I can say from my current hometown in northern Afghanistan, as a small city, beautiful city, Maimana. I see from Facebook that a lot of people had to shut down their shops, restaurants for many due to many reasons, including the taxes. So people have grievances for the taxes. That's one point. As we have said, they are all the concentration, all the focus is to increase the tax, increase the revenue for the government without any focus on the sustainability of the real income generators, who are the private sector. So with shrunk economy, with an economy that's effectively in no growth zone, as reported by World Bank, and with closed or very constricted financial environment, the private sector cannot sustain for a very long time. So if the situation goes like that, the private sector, there's no hope for private sector to develop. It might not perish away, but there is no way to develop. When there is no development in private sector, we don't have any hope for investments in different aspects. We don't have any hopes for increased employments and income generation, which traps the Afghan population again to this vicious cycle of poverty and destitution.
If I can add, or you want to add something? So to answer this, one thing I can say that the Taliban inherited a relatively functional state administration and civil services from the Republic. Their priority, but the Taliban's priority is cement their hold on power by placing their cadre in all key posts and offering jobs to mullahs and former combatants. The quality of the public sector staff has declined, and in the absence of coherent policies, this is really important. In the absence of coherent policies and collecting revenues from every parts and every sectors, there are no national development programs. While the civil service has some staff committed to the public good, they have the opportunity to advancing initiatives, but they cannot initiate because most of these public services who worked in the private sector and as well the ministries that supported private sectors, they are being replaced. So a country facing formidable problems needs a marketplace of ideas, workable solutions, and that you cannot see anything like this here. So that can be an answer to the question.
So there's another question which says that since under the Republic there are so many leakages and public distrust, government and operating costs were huge, which were underwritten by the international aid anyway. The Taliban have flattened the corruption curve, increased the revenues through tax collection and customs duties. Does this mean and assume that the Taliban have the same budget as the previous regimes or access to international aid? In other words, if they have the same access, will they be a more efficient state? Can I let me take a stab at this? Being a more efficient state presupposes you have a better quality civil service and you have policies and processes that identify problems and deal with issues. In the Taliban system, there is no policy making because the policies are made by the supreme leader. And by the way, the Taliban have yet to issue a single strategy document. So running an efficient state, if you just think of the complexities of any of these issues, like, for example, like health or developing the mining industry with environmental standards, it requires capacity, and the Taliban government does not have that capacity. Let I think also people should be aware of the fact that the Taliban civil servants that have expanded are actually very well paid. Although the economy has collapsed, has shrunk initially by 25% in Hana, but civil service salaries have not. And civil service salaries are quite generous. And bear in mind, they are very generous, but they don't pay out pensions. So a whole swath of population that used to depend on pensions are not being paid. So I don't think that there is much of a way. I mean, we can just, you need systemic reform, and it's not going to happen with we have to stay afloat. Let's get money over here. Let's get money over there, and we'll allocate it. Nobody knows according to what principle, except for the fact that we need to keep our guys happy. How does your analysis stabilization of foreign currency vis-a-vis? What about the foreign currency, the exchange rate? The exchange rate.
So I want to add about the very good question that you have rightly added. Very good points. I just want to say that part of the thing is, as you have said, they are doing the budget with minimal capacity requirements, since their focus is increasing their budget and increasing their revenue and paying the salaries. And as we have said, the development budget does not indicate existence of any policy. So in a scenario that this government with this situation and this ideology accesses the similar amount of financial international aid that the previous government had the luxury of, we don't see any capacity. And capacity to handle that. The fiduciary risks are very high. Wasteful allotments are inevitable. And one other thing that I want to add is one of the most important thing is the legitimacy, the inclusivity, especially in the context of Afghanistan. The inclusion of different people is very important for the growth of that country, because the growth is ultimately partnered with the it's triggered by the it's driven by the population of a country, not only the government. So I think that's very important. And in terms of exchange rate, I would not have many concrete things to say, but I know that the impact of cash transfers are significant. These very much gap the shortage that exists due to the due to the shutdown on aids that brought currency. And other thing is the decreased and plummeted aggregate demand, which in turn decreases the demand for foreign currency. That's my take. I would be happy if Mr. Hamoon wants to add anything to that.
I think we've answered every question in the Q&A has been dealt with, and if not, please let me know. And we have two people who have raised their hands. The first one was Mr. Andalib, and then Mr. Atul. Are we doing okay? So,
thank you very much for giving the opportunity once again. In addition, what Mr. Tawakkoli said about the exchange rate, I would like to add the Taliban, both fiscal and monetary policies, fully dependent on foreign aids, the humanitarian aids. These humanitarian aids actually indirectly goes to the Taliban hand, and they can use it to collect Afghani from the market and pump dollar to the market to keep the exchange rate a kind of in a stable rate. In addition, they prevented, they took the security of the borders, and they are not allowing people to carry or transfer dollar currency to neighboring countries. And I think with these policies, they could keep a kind of stable exchange rate, but it's fully dependent if the humanitarian aids get delayed or stopped for a while. We are pretty sure Afghani rate, Afghani will lose its value quickly, and it will be a kind of big financial crisis in the country.
Okay, Mr. Atul? You had your hand up? Atul?
Yeah, so
Yes? You wanted to say something? How are we doing for time?
I have seen Hamid Karzai and Ashraf Ghani's regime, and corruption was a lot. People used to literally keep US dollar in gunny bags and taking here and there and getting government's contract. So my question is, there is a de-dollarization is required because Afghanistan is surrounded by the countries like Iran, who has an embargo restriction, and India also can help, and India has a quite good foreign surplus. So there can be a de-dollarization and understand share exchange in the local currencies. And second thing is a restriction on floating of US dollar across the borders, and everything should be taxable, not in cash, through the bank accounts. So that will be definitely help. And microfinance is also required for small business, like one gentleman says in the north, business are closing. So local business need to increase so that people get a job, and local market flourish, and local goods flourish, come in the market. So, and like I said earlier, revenue management, you need to promote tourism because you have quite a good population of youth.
Yes, well, under the current circumstances, for the obvious reasons, people are not rushing to Afghanistan.
And donor conference is also required. Donor
conference is required. The donor conferences cannot take place. No movement can take place until, I don't understand why. Just understand that until the Taliban changes its policy on women, the international community is not going to move. Neither should it.
But the UN is there.
The UN is there to make sure that people don't starve.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do you guys have Ahmad, Waheed? Let me ask you a question. What about the future? How do you see things running in the future? What are going to be the engines of change? Please answer. Waheed, Ahmad, answer.
I was waiting for Ahmad to respond.
Yeah, well, come here. We're running out of time.
Are you around, Ahmad?
He's around. But unmute yourself, Ahmad.
Okay. I thought I spoke a lot, so I still, just like any organization, just like any sound person familiar with the situation in Afghanistan, I still insist on the same points that the world region and Afghan population has been screaming loud. It's in political inclusivity, it is rights of women, and it is sound engagement within Afghanistan and outside. If these does not change, and if we see the the humanitarian aid decline, it would be hard for Afghanistan if for the current Afghan government to be able to change anything other than recruiting more mullahs and pressing the public for more revenue. So as a prerequisite for any solid and sustainable change in the country, these things should pave the way for a legitimate government where the Taliban see that the Afghans are not all the Taliban people, are not all mullahs, and not all men. So there are different groups and two genders. Both of genders have role to play their role in the country and to see themselves in there. Other than that, there will be no way, I think.
Well, one of the things that we are seeing in Afghanistan is, at least people are talking about it, is a kind of difference of opinion between the people who are in Kabul and live and work in Kabul, and that's a very important experience for the Taliban to do that, and are concerned with economic development. And those guys who sit in Kandahar and are not in touch with that. And when I visited Kabul, I could see clearly, that people want to progress and to see the economy. And you had an international fair where the rules restricting women were suspended. So, do you think there's any hope that there will be a group strong enough that wants to promote economic growth and private sector growth, that it can be the internal pressure for the Taliban older leadership to change their minds?
It was a good hope, I would say, that when we heard some of their members telling something about women, political inclusivity, women's right, and education. But as time passed, we have seen that not only these voices didn't get echoed, they kind of almost diminished. So I would say that such hope to see that, okay, the group that has different idea, that knows the needed changes, would finally bring about a change within the Taliban. I would still think it's a wishful thinking. We have to see solid issues. Many members of them came in front of cameras, international media, saying that no, this problem will be solved, the problem for education will be resolved. But as we see, there is no way things change, and we see new speeches from the Supreme Leader insisting on his position on these issues.
Well,
Something
on that,
I want to add.
we want to end on an optimistic note, Hamoon. Waheed.
So just one sentence. So, because of the new facticity and the need to secure international recognition and financial assistance, I believe until the Taliban concede to a promise of moderation and greater inclusivity, the status quo will continue.
Okay, well, colleagues and participants, thank you very much for participating in this lecture. And Waheed and Ahmad, thank you very much for doing the paper that for the first time tells us how Taliban is spending money, and that although they're very proud of their revenue, they are in fact as reliant on aid as the previous government. Well, to the extent that if not for international assistance, the starvation would be a very, very big concern, and that's a terrible state of events. So please stay tuned. We will have a very interesting speaker in April, and thank you very much for participating. We appreciate your interest. Thank you.